10:05, welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk KFYO. Thank you for tuning in. Final hour of today's program, 770-5790, 1-800-687-0790. We go to the phones. Joining us this morning, editor of quorumreport.com, our good friend Scott Braddock. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. I'm getting ready to have a pimento cheese sandwich later for lunch in honor of the Masters.
Oh, very nice. All right.
That's what you should do, right? They asked one of the guys, I'm trying to remember who it was, but they asked him, what's your favorite part of the Masters? He said, the sandwiches. They said, which one? He said, all of them. But the right answer is the pimento cheese.
That's right. Yeah, that's the official.
I grew up poor on the farm, Chad. I mean, we ate a lot of pimento cheese when I was a kid. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely not. A lot going on statewide. I guess, right now, and something that's, big happening here and in El Paso and up in Amarillo as well. COVID cases are continuing to rise. I think yesterday in Lubbock we had 740 cases, something like that. New cases reported yesterday. So big spikes. Obviously, El Paso, it's a little bit out of control there as well. What are we hearing from the governor's office? What are we seeing from the governor?
The governor's been making the rounds on television once again, doing those interviews, one-on-one with different stations this past week. And on our podcast, the Texas Take, which people can subscribe to, of course, Texas Take on Apple, Apple, Google, whatever. I'm going to get my plug in, Chad.
Absolutely.
We were discussing what Abbott had rolled out as his answer for these specific questions about specific problems, and he's pointing back to the original or some of the previous executive orders saying that, if the hospitalizations go above 15%, then those orders already have automatic rollbacks and some of the different restrictions. As you know, the state and El Paso have been locked in a battle over exactly who's allowed to make these calls. I think it is good, Chad, that you do have court battles going on about that, and so it can all be sorted out. As you remember, we talked about originally when all this was happening, when the governor asserted that the state has jurisdiction over this, that was largely untested. And around the state, you basically had, for all the noise they were making in places like Harris County, Dallas County, et cetera, where they've also had an uptick in Dallas County, they said they didn't like it that the governor was asserting he had the ability to do that, but you didn't really see them fighting him about it, not in a real way, but it's been, fought out now in El Paso, where the stories are just terrible. I was just looking at one report out of El Paso County where there was a nurse who had said that in the hospital there, they had what they called the pit, which was, people being sent to this one, part of the hospital, with COVID cases, and they were getting very limited treatment. They'd allow for CPR only 2 or 3 times before they would, give up on the person. Extraordinary measures weren't going to be, done in an exhaustive way, the way they normally would be, just because they don't have the resources. And they said that nobody survives the pit. And you probably also saw where El Paso County was putting some inmates to work, just really gruesome stuff, where they had, folks who are being held at the jail there, now being responsible for moving the bodies around. And so it is just a nasty situation there. Like you said, in Lubbock, the picture looks a little bit different, but the governor continues to insist that his previous executive orders cover what he wants to do right now. Although I was thinking about it over the weekend, Chad, what the governor may want to do, and we'll see, and what may be, whether he wants to or not, it may be politically advantageous, that you do have the legislature coming back fairly soon, and if they're going to be in session come January, we still don't have a real picture of what that's going to look like. They can't even figure out how to hold 1 or 2 meetings in Austin. They keep, scheduling meetings and then canceling them due to COVID, like so many things are due to COVID now. But if the governor is joined by lawmakers from around the state in Austin, and they start being perceived at least as being part of the decision-making process, that would sort of spread the blame around. And I think to one of the, if he has to crack down some more, I think to a point that you made earlier in the year, Chad, if he had called a special session that perception would already be there because people would at least think that the legislature had more to do with what the state's response is. Right now, it's all on the governor.
Yeah, it's all on the governor, and again, you've got you've got citizens who honestly they're not informed. They don't know who's in charge of doing what when it comes to the issues, and it's hard to blame them because you would think it would be a totally local issue, and it's not. This is all on the governor, because I've had people who have reached out to me, who've said, do you think that the mayor of Lubbock is going to shut down Lubbock? Well, he technically he can't, and what we're seeing play out in El Paso is that battle. Can the county judge in El Paso shut down El Paso County? And I think everyone, I would assume at least, all these elected officials all over the state are kind of watching how this plays out in El Paso. And if the El Paso County judge actually wins a case and gets to shut down the county, that's when we may start seeing some of the locals do it. But I don't think we're going to see anything until that's completely set in stone, right?
And it's an interesting point. It could be that this is determined more by the numbers in the short term, and then in the long term by the courts. And what I mean is you might actually see some of the other counties trying to do something like what they're doing in El Paso, maybe get a series of cases going, court cases going, to try to test the what some people say is overreach by the executive, overreach by Governor Abbott. And then, of course, there also is chatter of, during the legislative session, actually doing something, reforming the way that the governor's disaster powers work.
Yeah, and then I wonder, would that, again, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here, but until the session starts, well, they can't even bring up anything for a while in the session, and then is that going to, whatever bill they pass? Well, is that going to count towards today's emergency order that the governor has out, or is that only going to apply to future emergency orders?
Yeah,
there's a lot they have to mess around with.
Yeah, that in the Senate District 30 race, this issue is front and center. We have this runoff coming up in December with Shelley Luther, who, of course, is the rebel salon owner, as we have termed her, somebody who spoke out and actually was going to jail over defiance of the governor's orders. She's running against Drew Springer, and you can tell, Chad, that it's definitely something that's on the minds of voters when you have Springer go ahead and pre-file some legislation. I think you noted this on Twitter. He pre-filed some legislation that would do that would disperse the power and not take the governor out of the process completely, but I thought it was an interesting proposal, at least, to say that instead of just the governor making these decisions, that maybe it should be a board of people who the governor would serve on that board, but then it would also be made up of the House Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, and some others, I think. And then I don't have all of the details of the proposal in front of me, but one of the things that was interesting in it that I did see is that Springer's bill would dictate that at a certain point, and I think it was after 21 days in his proposal, of some executive order being in place, an emergency disaster powers order like this, after 21 days or so, the legislature might be automatically called into session to at least review what the governor had done, take a look at it, and then they could either green light it or maybe make some changes to it, which I think a lot of folks on both the Republican and Democratic side might be sympathetic to. And, I don't know what you hear from your listeners in Lubbock, Chad, but I have heard from folks around the state that, and it was people on both sides, people in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and elsewhere, saying that you just shouldn't have that much power vested in one person to be able to say, okay, all these things are shut down, or all these things should be open. Luther, interestingly, I saw her on a television interview yesterday in Dallas-Fort Worth, where she had said that this should be up to the locals. That she said that they know their communities better. They're more in touch and more on the ground in those areas. And so maybe the mayor of Lubbock ought to be the one making that call. Maybe the guy who's the county judge there, or the person in El Paso, or wherever, because Texas is such a diverse, vast place. I know we say that all the time, but it's true. And trying to micromanage the response out of Austin to a lot of people on both sides of the aisle seems like overreach, doesn't seem appropriate. But whether they can even have a legislative session and deliberate these kinds of things, still up in the air. Obviously, they can't, as far as I know, it can't be done that they would suspend the Constitution's requirement that the legislature gets to meet for 5 months every 2 years. But there are some proposals out there that are sort of under the radar right now, and a lot of chatter in Austin about having a truncated session that might only be 45 days or something along those lines. Maybe they come in on the first day that they would be in session in January, elect a new Speaker of the House, adopt rules in the House and Senate, and then gavel out for a month and come back once the committees have been able to figure out what they're going to do with the budget and some of the other big items that will be on the table.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Has there been any talk of using the there's a great big convention center in Austin?
Yeah.
Has there been any talk about using that as a possible? Because again, if they want to do social distancing on the floor, I don't know how you do that. If they're interested in doing that, and then having people allowed in the building and allowed to, testify on different pieces of legislation. Is there any thought about not necessarily moving the Capitol to the convention center this year, but having meetings there?
There is precedent for the legislators meeting somewhere other than the Capitol. I was reminded the other day that the Texas Senate, when they were doing some renovations in the building, the senators actually met in a different building for their sessions, for their daily sessions. And I'd have to go back and look exactly when that was. But the Constitution does say, the state Constitution says that, and it's interesting, Chad. The people who, set all that up originally, the founders of the state, the folks who were, trying to envision, what might be coming down the line at some point, it does say in our foundational document that in time of disease, that legislators can meet somewhere other than the Capitol, can meet somewhere other than Austin. Some lawyers who are a lot smarter than you and me have read that to mean that not only could they maybe meet in a different location, like the convention center, and to answer your question, I haven't heard specific chatter about that. But if they were going to meet somewhere else, those attorneys that I've talked to have said that the Constitution certainly allows for that, and they could all, because it says they could meet in a different location, that does mean they could meet from their houses, but they could meet on Zoom as long as it was open and all the public could see it.
Hey, text ledge on the beach. Maybe they go to
Sure.
an island somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Someone has a private island connection. You just go and hang out on a private island. Why not?
And I think, I was going to say, and one other thing about it, I think transparency is going to be key in this whole thing. Depending on how they decide they're going to do the legislative session, is the public going to have access to their actual deliberations? Are these folks going to be able to meet, sort of in private fashion, and then, have a Zoom meeting where they vote on the various proposals, or how that's going to work is going to be all up in the air as a question, because the transparency issues at the Capitol are already bad enough sometimes when they're not in a pandemic. There's often questions about the way that certain proposals get rolled out there and different ways that committees will meet and all that sort of stuff. And if they are having to meet in some other completely different location or do it online or something like that, and you remember how successful the Republican Party of Texas convention was when they tried to hold it online. To having a deliberation, in that fashion is not unprecedented, but hasn't been perfect. And so the way that they do that is going to be pretty critical. I think folks are going to look at it and have a lot of questions about the transparency issue. Are these folks going to do these things and make these decisions in a way where all Texans can not only keep track of what's going on, but also participate in the process? Because there are so many people who are just average citizens and also paid advocates as well, who go down to the Capitol to try to make their case and then influence legislation and, have a say in the process. And it's every Texan's right to be able to do that. And so trying to find the balance between keeping everybody safe from the disease and also allowing for a legitimate legislative process that everybody feels that is legitimate, that's going to be a tough thing to strike.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, tell folks what you're working on over at quorumreport.com.
Well, there are some very interesting new business groups popping up. There's the question of what issues are going to be on the table specifically during the legislative session. And this is that time, Chad, when different lobby organizations and business groups, trade associations try to start figuring out exactly what they might be able to get passed at the legislative session. And if it's going to be a super secret session like this, they need to do maybe even more prep work than they usually would, trying to, reach out to folks. So we've got our ear to the ground trying to figure out what's going on with all of that. You can check it out at quorumreport.com. Everything happening in your state government is available there, and you can sign up for a subscription. Just hit the subscription link at the top of the page. All
right, Scott, as always, appreciate your time. We'll visit with you again next week.
Thanks, my friend. Talk soon.
That's Scott Braddock, editor, quorumreport.com. We'll be right back.